There's a secret almost no one admits, yet more people share this one sex fantasy than you'd ever believe. What if I told you that even your closest friend, your neighbor, maybe even you, have imagined this? And the numbers might leave you speechless. So buckle up, because tonight, we're diving deep into the fantasy you didn't know everyone was having. There are some things we, as human beings, are very good at hiding. In the crowded streets, at polite dinner tables, beneath the steady gaze of coworkers and neighbors, lie countless secrets, tucked away in the recesses of our minds where only we can visit them. Some are ordinary, the little lies we tell ourselves to get through the day, the memories of mistakes we'd rather forget. But others are darker, more alluring, far more intimate. They pulse beneath the surface of every conversation, linger in the subtext of every glance, and bloom in the quiet moments when the world has fallen silent. And perhaps the most fascinating of these hidden treasures are our fantasies. Now, you might think fantasies are the kind of thing reserved for romance novels and risque films, spoken of in hushed voices or scrawled in the margins of diaries never meant to be read. But in truth, they're far more common, far more universal, and far more revealing than most would ever dare admit. Because within these private daydreams lies not just desire, but something deeper, a reflection of who we are when no one's watching. And tonight, I want to share with you a story, or rather, a confession, not mine alone, but a collective secret shared by millions across generations, cultures, and corners of the world. A fantasy so popular, so consistently recurring in the deepest corners of human imagination, that it defies age, gender, and background. It's not what you might expect. It's not the usual clichés of forbidden love or spontaneous trysts in shadowed corners. No, this one is different. And perhaps, as you listen, you'll discover a part of yourself you hadn't dared to name. Our tale begins not in the bedroom, but in the human mind, that restless theater of images, scenarios, and temptations. Because long before any act is carried out, it lives first in thought. And those thoughts, those vivid, unspoken fantasies, have a peculiar power of their own. For centuries, scholars, poets, and philosophers have speculated on the nature of human desire. The ancient Greeks believed in the duality of Eros and Thanatos, the drive for love and life, forever at odds with the pull of destruction. In Victorian England, fantasies were locked away beneath layers of repression and polite society, their existence hinted at only in coded language and scandalous gossip. And yet, across time, one particular theme has persisted, reappearing in old diaries, whispered confessions, and modern research alike. It is the fantasy of submission and control. Not always in the overt, theatrical sense that popular media might suggest, but often in subtler, more nuanced ways. The allure of surrendering decision-making, of being led into uncharted territories, of exploring the boundaries between dominance and vulnerability. It is not about pain, or punishment, or shame, though for some it might include those elements. At its heart, it is about release. The shedding of responsibility, the relinquishing of control, and the intoxicating freedom that comes from saying, if only for a moment, I trust you. Take me where you will. Recent studies suggest that an astonishingly high percentage of people, men and women alike, have entertained such fantasies. One particular survey, conducted quietly and anonymously, revealed that over 65% of respondents admitted to imagining themselves in scenarios where power was exchanged, control was handed over, or boundaries were tested. And among those, a surprising majority confessed to having never spoken of it aloud. It's not difficult to understand why. The world demands so much from us. We are expected to be in control of our careers, our relationships, our futures. To make decisions, stand firm, and carry burdens without complaint. And yet, beneath that stoic exterior, there exists a craving for softness, for surrender, for a moment unshackled from the weight of expectation. I remember an old woman once telling me, with the faintest smile playing at the corner of her lips, that the most dangerous thing in the world is a secret left unspoken. Because secrets have a way of growing, of morphing into monsters or miracles depending on how we choose to tend them. And fantasies, they are perhaps the most beautiful secrets of all. One man, a reserved accountant from a small town in Iowa, once confessed through an anonymous letter to a publication known for its discretion. He wrote of a lifelong fantasy, never acted upon, never spoken of to his wife of 27 years. In his mind, he imagined a world where, behind closed doors, he was no longer the decision-maker, no longer the dependable pillar of the household. Instead, he would give himself over entirely, allowing another to dictate the pace, the pleasure. The terms of his surrender. Not in violence, not in humiliation, but in a tender, commanding kind of intimacy that left him breathless even in thought. And he was not alone. A young woman from Paris spoke of something similar. A fantasy she'd carried since adolescence, though she'd learned early on to suppress it, for fear of being judged. Hers was a narrative of being desired so completely, so overwhelmingly, that resistance was rendered irrelevant. A fantasy not of danger, but of total immersion, where the world fell away and she belonged. If only for a moment, entirely to someone else's will. What unites these stories, across genders and cultures, is not the specifics of the act, but the essence of it, the yearning to relinquish control in a world that constantly demands it. There's a peculiar kind of magic in imagining a scenario where one is utterly desired, where the weight of decision is lifted, where pleasure is no longer a negotiation but a gift freely given and received. And for many, this fantasy is not merely about sex, but about being seen, completely, without pretense or performance. Psychologists suggest that such fantasies often serve as a psychological release valve. In the same way dreams help us process the events of our waking life, fantasies allow us to explore aspects of ourselves we might not be ready, or able, to confront in reality. They offer a safe space to rehearse, to imagine, to feel. And in doing so, they help us better understand who we are. It's worth noting, too, that these desires are rarely static. What one craves in fantasy might never be sought in waking life. The mind, after all, is an endless expanse, where the rules of logic and consequence do not apply. And therein lies its beauty. There's a story told by a therapist in a small coastal town who, after decades of quiet practice, began collecting the anonymous fantasies of her clients. With their permission, she compiled them, carefully, respectfully, never attaching names, only ages and the briefest of personal details. What emerged was a tapestry of human longing that transcended the expected. An elderly widower, in his 70s, imagined being gently overpowered by a partner half his age. Not for conquest, but for the aching tenderness of being wanted. A successful businesswoman confessed to recurring fantasies of being a captive queen, her crown and status rendered meaningless in the private chambers of a mysterious stranger. A devout pastor, struggling with the conflict between faith and flesh, dreamed of moments where heaven and sin blurred into something beautiful and terrible all at once. And so it goes, 1,000 variations on a single theme, the delicate dance between dominance and submission, between control and surrender. What makes this particular fantasy so enduring, so persistent across time, is its adaptability. It can be playful or serious, gentle or rough, elaborate or simple. It's a narrative into which each individual can weave their own characters, settings, and outcomes. And in doing so, they claim a small piece of freedom from the roles the world insists they play. Perhaps you, listening now, have entertained such a thought yourself. Perhaps in the quiet hours before sleep, or in the moments when your mind drifts away from the demands of the day, you've imagined a scenario in which you were no longer responsible, no longer expected to lead. A moment when you could simply feel. There is no shame in it. Desire, after all, is one of the few truly honest things about us. It reveals itself without permission, often inconveniently, and persists whether acknowledged or ignored. I suspect that part of what makes this fantasy so compelling is its duality. It offers both danger and safety, risk and sanctuary. In giving up control, one paradoxically takes control, choosing to surrender, on their own terms. It is not about weakness, but about trust. And in that trust, a kind of alchemy occurs. In the next chapter of our story, we'll explore how this fantasy has been portrayed in art, literature, and film, often hidden in plain sight, disguised as metaphor or allegory, yet instantly recognizable to those who know where to look. But for now, as we pause at this juncture, I invite you to consider the hidden corners of your own mind. What narratives linger there? What secrets, if any, have you kept even from yourself? Because if history has taught us anything, it's that the fantasies we fear the most often tell us the most about who we truly are. If one were to trace the history of human storytelling, from the ancient epics whispered around crackling fires to the sprawling modern novels resting on nightstands today, they would find this fantasy woven into its fabric like a thread of dark silk. It hides in plain sight, cloaked in metaphor, dressed in allegory, and disguised as countless characters whose fates revolve around the delicate interplay of control and surrender. Long before contemporary cinema cast its alluring shadows, ancient myths spoke of gods and mortals locked in battles not just of might, but of will. Consider Persephone, goddess of spring, abducted by Hades and taken to the underworld, a narrative recounted for generations not merely as a tale of seasons, but as a symbol of possession and reluctant desire. Though modern sensibilities recoil at its implications, those old stories carried within them echoes of the same fantasy that lingers in our private thoughts today. The idea of being wanted so absolutely that one's resistance is both futile and desired, not for conquest, but for the affirmation it grants the captor, and in turn, the captive. Literature has long been a mirror for these fantasies. The Bronte sisters, writing under the heavy constraints of Victorian propriety, laced their works with charged, unspoken tensions. Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre are not mere romances but psychological battlegrounds where characters wrestle with domination, submission, and the terror of their own desires. Heathcliff's wild, ungovernable nature, Mr. Rochester's brooding authority, these were not accidents, but carefully drawn reflections of the silent, collective longings of their readers. Even in poetry, desire blooms in coded language. In Sappho's ancient verses, the act of yielding to passion is described with such aching tenderness that it transcends centuries, whispering to modern readers in tones both ancient and familiar. Shakespeare, too, was no stranger to these themes. His sonnets and plays are dense with implications of power's seduction, of the sweet agony of surrendering to a force beyond oneself. And what of modern cinema? For all its gloss and spectacle, film has continued to tap into this vein of secret fantasy. From the torrid tension of Gone with the Wind to the charged exchanges in Eyes Wide Shut, audiences have been both scandalized and drawn to narratives that explore what it means to give in. Even the most buttoned-up dramas often carry a pulse of forbidden yearning just beneath their surface. It's no coincidence that franchises like 50 Shades of Grey, though critically maligned, found such a ravenous audience. It wasn't the writing, nor the overt eroticism, but the core fantasy at its heart, the notion of surrender without judgment, of being chosen, controlled, and cherished in equal measure. That paradox of domination not as cruelty, but as a twisted form of intimacy, is a powerful narcotic for the human psyche. Yet what fascinates is not the explicit, but the subtle. The unspoken glances in crowded rooms, the lingering touch that says more than words ever could, the moments in stories where a character chooses, or pretends to choose, powerlessness. It's in those slivers of narrative, often overlooked, that the most potent depictions of this fantasy reside. Art and storytelling, of course, merely reflect the culture from which they emerge. And for as long as these fantasies have existed in stories, they've existed in the hearts of the people consuming them. In private diaries, letters tucked away in old trunks, and anonymous confessions published in back pages of obscure journals, this craving has revealed itself time and again. A curious pattern emerges when one reads such accounts. Regardless of the era or setting, the essential elements remain the same: the relinquishing of decision, the thrill of helplessness tempered by safety, and the paradoxical sense of power in choosing to surrender. Consider a letter unearthed from a collection of Victorian correspondences, written by a young woman to her closest friend. In it, she confesses to imagining herself abducted by a dark, unknown figure, swept away from the suffocating expectations of her world. Not harmed nor shamed, but treasured, desired, and ultimately adored. The language is florid, the metaphors thick, but the core is unmistakable. An aching desire to be seen without artifice, to be wanted in a way that defies propriety. And this letter, fragile and yellowed with time, could have been written yesterday. Modern psychology has begun to take these fantasies seriously, not as deviants, but as a natural outgrowth of the human need for connection, risk, and release. In countless surveys conducted by researchers in the quiet corners of universities and clinical practices, participants reveal a startling consistency in their private thoughts. The scenarios may differ in detail: a stranger's firm hand, a lover's command, a stolen moment of helplessness, but the emotions they stir are strikingly similar. They are not rooted in cruelty, nor in shame, but in trust. In the delicate, almost sacred agreement between two people to step outside the ordinary boundaries of control and submission, and in doing so, to explore the outer edges of vulnerability. One therapist, known for her discretion and gentle demeanor, once explained it this way: "The act of surrender is not weakness. It is the bravest kind of trust. And for those who crave it, it is often less about the physical and more about the emotional landscape it creates." Her words echo in every confession I've read, every story I've heard whispered in low, hesitant tones. It is not the scenario that matters, but the feeling it evokes, a heady mix of fear and safety, of being utterly known, and, in that knowing, utterly loved. Perhaps that is why this fantasy endures when others fade. It taps into something primal and essential, our desire to be seen, to be wanted without conditions, and to experience the sweet, terrifying freedom of letting go. Even as the world shifts, as new norms emerge and old ones crumble, this fantasy remains. It adapts, finding new forms, new disguises, but the core remains untouched. In the digital age, it flourishes in anonymity. Online forums, hidden chat rooms, and private message boards hum with the unspoken desires of those who might never voice them aloud. Behind screen names and avatars, people reveal their most guarded fantasies, seeking understanding, validation, or simply the relief of confession. What's remarkable is not how many of these fantasies exist, but how often they mirror each other. Across continents, languages, and generations, strangers describe nearly identical scenes, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce, always charged with the same emotional undercurrent. A soldier stationed overseas dreams of being blindfolded and led into the unknown by a lover whose face he never sees. A grandmother, long widowed, recalls the ache of being pinned beneath a husband who adored her, and longs for that loss of control once more. A young artist fantasizes about a patron who demands both her art and her body, offering neither apology nor explanation. The particulars shift, but the themes remain constant. In this way, our fantasies connect us, weaving an invisible thread between lives otherwise separate. They remind us that beneath our varied exteriors, our professions, our social roles, our carefully curated images, we are all vulnerable to the same longings. And it is in this vulnerability that the greatest intimacy lies. There is a truth rarely spoken in polite company: that desire does not wither with age, nor is it confined to the young and untested. On the contrary, fantasies often deepen as life progresses, enriched by experience, sorrow, and the slow accumulation of wisdom. What begins in youth as a vague, nameless craving often sharpens into something far more specific and cherished with time. One woman, widowed at 60, confessed that she had never allowed herself to acknowledge her fantasies until her husband passed. Not for lack of love, but out of fear, of judgment, of misunderstanding, of disrupting the delicate balance of their life together. And yet, in the quiet years that followed, she discovered a world within her own mind more vivid than she'd imagined possible. In the late hours of sleepless nights, she constructed elaborate narratives where she was both captive and queen. Powerless and revered, she kept no journal, spoke to no one of it, yet described those imagined moments as the most honest she had ever known herself to be. This, too, is a kind of freedom. Fantasies are, in many ways, our truest language. They speak to us in symbols and sensations, revealing truths we might not dare articulate in words. They bypass reason and slip into the marrow of who we are, not to betray us, but to offer a reflection of our innermost selves. And while some will dismiss them as mere indulgence, those who understand their power recognize them for what they are, a sanctuary, a reckoning, and at times, a catalyst for change. In the chapters that follow, we'll explore how these fantasies evolve in relationships, how partners navigate the delicate act of revealing such private desires, and how trust, when nurtured, can transform fantasy into profound connection. But for now, let us linger here, in this shared understanding that whatever shape your fantasies take, however strange or unspoken, you are far from alone, because more people than you would ever believe have imagined the same. And so, the fantasy we've explored tonight is not just a secret whispered in the dark. It's a shared human truth, a delicate thread woven through time and culture. Perhaps it's a reminder that beneath the surface, we all crave connection, trust, and the freedom to surrender without fear. If this story resonated with you, don't hesitate to explore your own hidden desires with kindness and curiosity. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Be sure to subscribe so we can continue uncovering the truths that unite us all.